Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of British Columbia, a land of forgotten corners, isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever told. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened during the winter. I worked nights at a gas station just outside a dying logging town in northern British Columbia called Pine Hollow. I took the job because it paid well and because I needed quiet. After my divorce, silence felt safer than people. Pine Hollow had plenty of it. The highway cut through endless black forest, and after midnight, no cars passed for hours. The locals warned me about the night shift, not in a joking way, more like tired resignation. If someone knocks after 2 a.m., one old man said, "Don't open the door." At first, nothing happened, just wind scraping the building and the hum of the fluorescent lights. But every night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the security camera facing the tree line glitched. Just 1 second of static. Then, on the 7th night, the glitch didn't clear, and something moved where the forest should have been empty. I leaned closer to the monitor, telling myself it was just a camera fault. Cheap equipment, old wiring. That's what logic said. But the shape on the screen didn't behave like static. It paused. Then it shifted sideways, too smoothly, like it knew where the camera was. I felt stupid being scared of pixels, yet my chest tightened anyway. I checked the front windows. The forest beyond the pumps looked normal. Dark, still, silent. No footprints in the snow, no movement. At 2:17 a.m., the store phone rang. No one ever called that number. I let it ring twice before answering. All I heard was breathing, slow, wet, too close to the receiver. Then a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not guessed. Spoken like it had practiced saying it for years. I slammed the phone down, hands shaking, and locked the door behind the counter. That's when the motion sensor above the pumps chimed. Something was standing outside, and it hadn't used the road to get there. I stayed frozen behind the counter, staring at the front door as if it might breathe. The motion sensor chimed again, softer this time, like something shifting its weight just out of sight. I forced myself to look through the glass. At first, I saw only my own reflection layered over the pumps and the snow. Then my eyes adjusted. Something tall stood between the far pump and the tree line, too thin to be a person, shoulders hunched forward as if gravity pulled at it wrong. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't move at all. My radio crackled suddenly, loud enough to make me jump. A burst of static, then a voice I recognized. Cal, the previous night clerk. He'd quit 2 months ago without explanation. "Ethan," the radio hissed, "don't acknowledge it." I whispered back, asking where he was, asking what it was. The radio went silent. Outside, the tall shape slowly raised its head. I realized then it was facing the camera, and it was smiling. I backed away from the window, every instinct screaming to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The back room was a storage closet with no exit, and the ceiling tiles rattled as wind slammed into the building. The security monitor flickered again. The shape was closer now, standing directly in front of the door. I could see details I wished I couldn't. Skin stretched tight like old leather, eyes reflecting light wrong, mouth too wide for its face. It lifted one long finger and tapped the glass. Once, twice. The sound echoed through the empty store. Then it spoke. not out loud, but inside my head, pressing against my thoughts like cold hands. "You replaced him," it said. "You'll stay longer." I felt an overwhelming certainty that if I opened the door, it wouldn't rush in. It wouldn't need to. Something else moved at the edge of the forest. Another shape, then another. Watching, waiting their turn. The radio crackled once more. Cal's voice returned, shaking. "It never leaves," he whispered. "It only trades faces. I don't remember deciding to move." But suddenly, I was in the back room, pressed against the shelves of oil cans and windshield fluid, breathing through my teeth to stay quiet. The store lights flickered, dimming just enough to remind me how fragile that barrier really was. The tapping stopped. That scared me more than the sound itself. Silence meant choice. I checked my phone. No signal, just the spinning icon mocking me. That's when the power went out completely. The hum of the lights died, and the building fell into a darkness so thick it felt physical. From somewhere near the pumps, I heard the door unlock. I knew I hadn't touched the switch. Footsteps crossed the tile slowly, deliberately, like the thing was savoring every step. As it moved, the air grew colder, and a familiar smell filled the store. Pine sap and something rotten underneath. Then I heard Cal's voice again, closer this time, pleading for help. I covered my mouth to keep from answering, even as my heart begged me to believe it was really him. The footsteps stopped just outside the storage room door. I could see a thin line of shadow spill beneath it, stretching unnaturally across the floor. "Ethan," Cal's voice whispered again, softer now, almost kind. "You don't have to be alone anymore." I pressed my back harder into the shelves, metal digging into my spine. My mind raced through memories of Cal. How tired he looked, how he avoided mirrors, how he never worked more than one winter. The door handle turned, slowly, carefully. Before it could open, the power snapped back on. The lights flooded the store, and the shadow vanished like it had never been there. I waited for the door to burst inward, but it didn't. When I finally stepped out, the store was empty. The front door was still locked. No footprints marked the snow outside, but on the counter, beneath the radio, lay a name tag. Caldwell, night shift. My name, with dried blood where the pin should have been. I stood there for a long time, staring at the name tag like it might start breathing. My reflection in the glass behind the counter looked wrong somehow. Too pale, too still. I told myself it was shock, lack of sleep, anything but what my gut was screaming. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Cal. Multiple voices bled through the static, overlapping, whispering fragments of sentences I couldn't fully understand. Names, apologies, regrets. Every one of them sounded tired. I realized then that Pine Hollow wasn't abandoned because the logging dried up. People left because staying too long meant becoming something the forest could keep. Outside, dawn began to creep in, turning the snow a dull gray. The shapes near the tree line retreated, dissolving back into shadow as the light grew stronger. The tall one lingered longest, watching me through the glass. Its smile faded, replaced by something almost disappointed. When the sun finally rose, the forest looked normal again, peaceful, silent. That's when the manager arrived to relieve me, confused, asking why I was still there. I quit that morning, didn't explain. Just handed over the keys and walked away before anyone could ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I left Pine Hollow the same day and never looked back. Years have passed since then, but some nights, at exactly 2:17 a.m., My phone screen flickers even when it's turned off. I hear static in quiet rooms, smell pine sap where there are no trees. Last week, I stopped at a gas station off a different highway, hundreds of miles away. As I paid, I noticed the night clerk's name tag. It had my last name on it. When I looked up, the clerk smiled at me. Too wide, too familiar. And for a moment, I saw the forest reflected in his eyes instead of the store lights. I didn't say a word. I walked out, heart pounding, knowing the truth at last. You don't escape Pine Hollow. You just trade places. And somewhere, deep in the forests of British Columbia, something is still working the night shift, waiting for someone new to stay too long. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, a shared last name, a tired clerk, a long night messing with my head. That's what I repeated as I drove away from the station, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. But the road felt wrong, too quiet. The trees pressed in close, their branches arching over the highway like ribs. My radio, which had been silent for years, turned on by itself. Static filled the car, thick and heavy. Then a voice slipped through. "Still awake?" it asked. It wasn't Cal. It wasn't me. The headlights flickered, and for a split second I saw figures standing just beyond the shoulder of the road. Thin, patient shapes facing the asphalt, waiting, not chasing, never chasing. I understood then that the thing from Pine Hollow didn't belong to one place. The forest was just its doorway. Every small town, every night shift, every lonely person desperate for quiet. The static faded, replaced by silence. But the feeling didn't leave. I wasn't being followed. I was being marked. I don't work nights anymore. I avoid small towns, back roads, anywhere the forest feels too close. Still, I know it doesn't matter. Some doors only need to be opened once. Every so often I'll catch my reflection in dark glass and flinch. My smile lingers a fraction too long. My eyes look tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Last month, a new gas station opened near my city. Bright lights, clean floors, hiring sign in the window. I stood across the street, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut, watching people come and go without fear. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the lights inside flickered. I turned away before I could see who was working the counter, because part of me already knew, and part of me, quiet, ashamed, and patient, felt the pull to step inside. Pine Hollow doesn't need forests anymore. It doesn't need isolation. It just needs someone awake when everyone else is asleep. My name is Liam Fraser, and this happened when I was 26. The winter I took a courier job driving medical supplies between isolated towns in central British Columbia. I liked driving at night. Less traffic, less conversation. Just the road and the radio keeping me company. There was one stretch of highway I was warned about, a back route locals called Old Mile 14. It wasn't on most GPS maps anymore, but using it shaved nearly 40 minutes off my run. Dispatch told me not to worry. People exaggerate, they said. The first time I drove it, I understood why people talked. The trees pressed in unnaturally close, their branches leaning over the asphalt like they were listening. The road felt narrower than it should have been, even though the lines were freshly painted. At exactly 1:40 a.m., my speedometer dipped on its own. The radio cut out. Then I saw the tire tracks ahead of me. They weren't old. They weren't fresh. They looked like they were being pressed into the road right then, without any vehicle making them. I slowed to a crawl, my foot hovering over the brake as the tracks continued ahead, perfectly centered, like something invisible was driving just beyond my headlights. I told myself it had to be temperature changes. ice shifting, anything that didn't involve my imagination running wild. Still, my hands tightened on the wheel. Then the track stopped. Abruptly. Right in the middle of the road, my headlights swept over empty asphalt, and for a moment, I felt stupid for being scared. That's when the smell hit me. Hot rubber and wet earth, sharp enough to sting my nose. The radio came back on in a burst of static, followed by a voice that wasn't a station. "Too fast," it said calmly. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering. The engine stalled. The dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, then stabilized. When I looked up, there was a reflective road sign ahead that hadn't been there before. It was bent, rusted, and old, and scratched into the metal over and over again were the words, "Slow down. We remember." I sat there with the engine idling, staring at the sign like it might move if I blinked. The words hadn't been painted or carved cleanly. They looked dragged into the metal, uneven and frantic, as if written by hands that had slipped while trying to escape. I stepped out of the van, despite every instinct screaming at me not to. The cold hit hard, the kind that makes your lungs burn. My boots crunched on gravel that shouldn't have been there. This stretch of road was supposed to be smooth. Up close, I noticed something worse. Beneath the scratches were older marks, nearly worn away by time. Names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, some circled. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, no distant traffic. It felt staged, like the world was holding its breath. When I turned back toward the van, the tire tracks were there again. Fresh, deep. They led from the darkness of the trees. Straight to my driver's side door. I didn't run. I should have. But fear rooted me in place. The tracks stopped inches from the door, as if whatever made them had paused out of courtesy or curiosity. The van's interior light flicked on by itself. Through the window, I saw the passenger seat buckle sink slightly, like someone had just sat down. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice sounded closer, layered, like several people speaking through one mouth. "You were late," it said. I shook my head, whispering that I was on time, that I followed the route, that I didn't mean any harm. The seat dipped further, the invisible weight shifting as if turning to face me. The forest answered with a low creaking sound, trees bending without wind. Suddenly, I understood the warning. This road didn't punish recklessness. It punished memory. Every crash, every shortcut, every driver who thought the road was empty. The voice spoke once more, softer now. "Drive carefully," it said. "We're still inside." I got back into the driver's seat without looking at the passenger side again. My hands shook so badly, I had to grip the wheel with both palms just to keep them steady. I started the engine and eased forward, careful not to go a single kilometer over the limit. The invisible weight shifted with the van. I felt it, not physically, but in the way the air inside seemed thicker, heavier. The mirrors fogged from the inside despite the cold. As I drove, headlights flickered on ahead of me. Another vehicle sat parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking slowly, like a heartbeat. I told myself to pass it. Keep moving, don't stop. But as I drew closer, I saw the driver's door hanging open and the interior caved in. Metal twisted inward as if something had squeezed it. The windshield was spiderwebbed, but there was no blood, no glass on the road. The radio whispered again, multiple voices overlapping. He stopped. He forgot. He thought he was alone. The hazard lights went dark as I passed, plunging the road back into black silence. After that, the road began to change. The asphalt cracked and repaired itself ahead of me, seams appearing and disappearing like scars, opening and closing. Mile markers repeated. 14, then 14 again, then 14 once more. I checked my clock. 10 minutes had passed, then 15. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. The passenger seat pressed down further, as if whoever was there had leaned closer. I smelled oil and smoke, sharp and metallic. I finally spoke, asking what it wanted. My voice sounded small inside the van. To be remembered, the road answered through the radio. To not be driven through like nothing happened. Images flashed through my head, head-on collisions, rollovers, crushed vans just like mine. I felt their panic, their regret, their last seconds stretched thin and endless. The weight lifted suddenly. The air cleared. Ahead, I saw a green highway sign glowing in my headlights. A normal road. A turnoff back to the main route. As I took it, the radio whispered one final warning. Don't forget us, or we'll remind you. I reached the main highway just before dawn, my body buzzing with exhaustion and something worse. Relief that felt undeserved. The forest thinned, traffic returned, and the world slowly pretended nothing had happened. By the time I finished my delivery, Old Mile 14 already felt unreal, like a bad dream fading in daylight. I tried to talk about it once, casually, with another driver at the depot. The moment I mentioned the shortcut, his face drained of color. He told me his cousin died there 5 years earlier. Single vehicle crash, no skid marks, no explanation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the road beneath me again, remembered the pressure in the passenger seat. My phone buzzed at 1:40 a.m., a notification from my navigation app. Route update available. I hadn't opened the app in hours. When I did, my screen showed only one highlighted road segment, Old Mile 14, marked as recently traveled. Even though I was lying in bed, miles away. After that, the reminders came slowly. A road sign I didn't remember passing, the smell of burnt rubber at random intersections, my speedometer twitching when I drove too fast, even on familiar streets. I started braking early, driving carefully, remembering. But the road wasn't finished with me. One night, months later, I drove past a fresh accident on the outskirts of town. Police lights flashed red and blue, reflecting off twisted metal. As I passed, my radio turned on by itself. Static, then a familiar chorus of voices. He didn't listen. He forgot too fast. I looked at the wreckage and felt the weight return. Not in my seat this time, but in my chest. I understood then that Old Mile 14 didn't stay behind. It followed drivers who knew its name. Some roads fade, some roads scar you, and some roads remember you, long after you think you've moved on. I quit the courier job not long after that. I told myself it was burnout, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what else might remember me. I stuck to daytime driving, crowded streets, places where accidents blended into noise and numbers. Still, the road found ways to speak. My GPS rerouted me without asking. Street names blurred into numbers that meant nothing except to me. 14, 14, 14. One evening, stuck in traffic, I noticed the car ahead of me creeping forward too fast, tailgating without realizing it. I flashed my lights, honked, tried to warn them. They didn't slow down. The radio whispered, almost gently, "Some people need to learn." I watched helplessly as the car clipped another at the intersection ahead. Metal screamed, glass burst, time stretched thin. In that moment, I felt the road settle, satisfied. It wasn't angry anymore. It was patient. And I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. Old Mile 14 didn't haunt drivers out of cruelty. It haunted them to be remembered, by making sure they never forgot. Now, when I drive, I keep my eyes on the road and my speed steady. I leave early, I arrive late. I remember every mile. Because sometimes, late at night, when the city quiets and the road's empty, I feel it again. The subtle pressure, the expectation. Last week, my navigation app updated itself. A new shortcut appeared, highlighted in blue. No name, no warnings. Just a clean, efficient line through a dark stretch of forest outside town. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the app and drove the long way home. Some roads punish recklessness. Some roads punish memory. And some roads are still hungry, waiting for someone new to forget the weight of the wheel, the cost of speed, the lives pressed into their asphalt. If you ever see a shortcut that saves too much time, take a moment. Slow down, because the road might remember you, even if you never learn its name. My name is Sophie Harrington, and this happened the winter I agreed to house sit for a friend in a remote part of British Columbia near Devil's Creek. I thought it would be peaceful, a chance to escape the city chaos and finish writing my novel. The cabin was beautiful, rustic and isolated. Snow-covered pines surrounded it, and the creek beyond whispered against the ice. There was no cell phone signal, no neighbors for miles. Just me, the trees, and the river. The locals I met in town warned me in hushed tones. "Don't stay after dark," they said, but smiled nervously as if admitting too much would bring trouble. I laughed it off. What harm could a cabin in the woods cause? On the first night, I was awakened by scratching on the front porch. A raccoon, I thought. I slipped on boots and went outside. Nothing. Only the snow disturbed, uneven footprints leading from the tree line to the door. That's when I realized the tracks weren't animal. They were human. I convinced myself it was someone in the area walking by, perhaps a hiker lost in the snow. Still, a chill ran down my spine as I locked the door and returned inside. The scratching didn't repeat, but footsteps echoed through the wooden floorboards above me, soft and deliberate. I told myself the cabin creaked. Old buildings do that. Old floors shift, old walls whisper. But the creek sounded different that night, too. The water's murmur felt sharp, almost like it was calling out my name. I stayed awake until dawn, staring out the frost-covered window, tracing the footprints in the snow that ended at my door. No one had entered, yet their presence was unmistakable. By the second night, the scratches returned, this time on the back door. The footprints were gone, but I could feel them watching from the tree line, patient and silent. And then I heard it, a voice carried on the wind, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." The third night, I decided to set up cameras around the cabin, hoping to catch a raccoon or maybe a lost hiker. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. When I checked the footage the next morning, the screens flickered with static, then revealed a tall, thin figure standing just beyond the tree line, staring at the cabin. It didn't move, not like an animal, not like a human. It only watched. Its limbs were elongated, joints bending in ways that made me recoil, and its head tilted unnaturally as if it could hear my thoughts. I called my friend, asking if anyone else had stayed there recently. She paused before answering, voice tight. "Sophie, people leave for a reason. Some cabins in Devil's Creek, they don't like strangers." I laughed nervously, pretending I wasn't terrified. But that evening, the footsteps started again, soft, dragging, circling the cabin. Every time I looked out a window, I caught just the edge of its form disappearing into the woods. And I knew it wasn't alone. By the fourth night, The scratching escalated to pounding on the doors and windows. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the cabin seemed alive, moving in sync with the wind. The creak sounded louder, rushing as though urging me to leave, carrying whispers I could almost understand. I lit candles, but their flicker only cast monstrous shapes on the walls. I tried reasoning with myself. There had to be an explanation. The cabin was old. Settling wood, wildlife, imagination. Then, from the tree line, I saw a faint glow. A lantern, maybe? Or eyes reflecting the candlelight? The thing, or things, moved closer. But no one came into the clearing. I realized I wasn't being stalked. I was being herded. Every noise, every shadow, every crack of ice on the creek guided me toward the back porch. I didn't want to go. But curiosity, fear, and survival instincts twisted together, urging me to see what awaited beyond the tree line. I stepped onto the back porch, heart hammering so loudly I thought it might echo through the trees. The snow crunched under my boots, breaking the eerie silence. The glow I had seen grew brighter. But it wasn't a lantern. It was too uniform, too steady, like light being poured from somewhere unseen. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw the figures, more than one, thin and twisted, emerging from the forest, moving in perfect silence. Their limbs were long and brittle, bodies swaying slightly with each step, heads cocked as if listening to some sound I couldn't hear. I wanted to run. I wanted to slam the door and hide inside. But the porch seemed to stretch beneath my feet, extending toward them as if guiding me. A voice, low and hollow, swept across the clearing. "You shouldn't be here." It was coming from all of them, yet nowhere at once. And I realized then, I wasn't being invited. I was being claimed. I stumbled backward onto the porch, gripping the railing for balance. The candlelight from inside the cabin flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows of the trees and the figures that moved in the yard. The snow shifted unnaturally beneath them, leaving prints that disappeared before they reached the porch steps. I could feel their eyes on me, though I knew they had none. The creek's murmur intensified, becoming a chant-like whisper, flowing over and through me. The wind carried words I couldn't fully hear, urging me toward the tree line, compelling me to step into the clearing. I turned to retreat into the cabin, but the front door slammed shut on its own. The windows rattled as if something massive was pressing against the glass. Then one figure stepped forward, its face partially illuminated by the candlelight. Hollow eyes, a wide, unnatural grin. "You belong here now," it hissed. And I understood that the forest had been waiting, patient for someone like me. I froze, unable to move, as the figure advanced onto the porch, the snow beneath it compressing without leaving a trace. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused. It was as if the forest itself had rooted me in place, forcing me to face whatever this was. The other figures remained at the edge of the tree line, silent, swaying slightly, watching. Their faces were obscured by shadows, yet I felt their attention pressing on me like a physical weight. Then a voice, my own friend's, broke through the chaos in my head. "Sophie, leave now." I realized the cabin wasn't just haunted. It was a trap. Every sound, every step, every flicker of light had been orchestrated to pull me outside, to the clearing, to the waiting. A branch snapped behind me, and I finally forced my feet to move, staggering backward toward the door. The figure hissed, low and guttural, words stretching across my mind. "You can't leave. Not until the creek claims you." I flung myself at the cabin door, rattling the lock until it gave way. Inside, the walls seemed to close in. Every shadow flickered unnaturally with the candlelight, forming shapes that mirrored the figures outside. I backed into a corner, trembling, the floorboards groaning beneath me. The windows rattled as if something massive were pressing against them, but the snow outside remained untouched. Then I saw it. A small trapdoor I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden under a rug. Instinct told me it was a way out. I pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that led under the cabin. I crawled inside, hearing the figures moving across the porch above me, their whispers mixing with the creek's chant. Every word was a warning, a lure, a demand. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I'd be frozen forever under those hollow, grinning eyes. And in the darkness of the tunnel, I realized the forest wasn't just alive. It was hungry. The tunnel seemed endless, curling beneath the cabin like the roots of the trees above. Every movement echoed as if the earth itself was listening. I pressed my palms to the cold stone walls, trying to steady my breathing, to tell myself it was just a basement, a normal place under a cabin. But the whispering followed me, seeping from the walls, the floor, the very air. You can't hide. You belong to us. I reached a small chamber under the creek, water dripping from the ceiling. In the dim glow from my phone's flashlight, I saw carvings along the stone, names scratched deep, decades old. Some names were crossed out, others circled, all with dates next to them. A sudden splash in the water made me freeze. Something large stirred beneath the surface, slow and deliberate. And then I understood. The creek wasn't just water. It remembered every person who had ever tried to escape. And it would remember me too, if I didn't move quickly. I scrambled through the tunnel, water rising around my knees. The whispering crescendoed into voices. Some familiar, some not, all demanding, warning, pleading. I could feel the figures above pacing, their elongated limbs tapping in rhythm to the creek's current. At last, the tunnel opened to a hidden exit on the far side of the creek. Snow crunched underfoot as I burst out into the cold night, lungs burning, heart hammering. Behind me, the cabin stood silent, peaceful, as if nothing had occurred. I ran until the forest thinned and I reached the nearest town, gasping words to anyone who would listen. When I turned back later, the cabin was gone, just the snow-covered clearing, undisturbed. I never went back. I never spoke of it to anyone outside the town. Some things I learned are meant to be forgotten, except for the forest, the creek, and the cabin at Devil's Creek, which remember everything. And I know, somewhere, it still waits for the next visitor. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened the summer I took a temporary job as a lighthouse keeper on Black Wave Point, a jagged promontory on the edge of British Columbia's coast. The permanent keeper had left suddenly, claiming illness, and I was eager for solitude, fresh air, and the chance to write in peace. The lighthouse rose like a sentinel against the crashing waves, its white paint peeling, metal rails rusted. Beyond the cliff, the ocean stretched endlessly, gray and violent, the waves roaring like they were alive. The town below was a mere cluster of houses, mostly abandoned, forgotten by time and tide. The first night was calm, almost peaceful. But then I noticed something odd. A small, dim light flickered along the jagged rocks below, moving against the wind and surf. I assumed it was a fishing boat. Yet no sound reached me except the wind and waves. And then I heard the footsteps above, pacing the spiral staircase inside the lighthouse, though I was alone. The second night, the footsteps returned, echoing unnaturally loud through the stone spiral. I tried calling the town, but the line was dead. My radio crackled once, then went silent. I told myself it was nerves, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I had been alone on the cliffs for over 24 hours. Fatigue can do strange things. But then I saw something impossible. Through the foggy window, a figure appeared at the edge of the cliff, tall and hunched, wearing the tattered uniform of a lighthouse keeper. Its head tilted unnaturally as it seemed to study me, frozen against the crashing waves. I blinked. It was gone. Later, in the lighthouse logbook, I noticed entries I hadn't written. Times and dates recorded precisely, along with cryptic notes. Do not look below. Do not stay after dark. And I realized then that Black Wave Point kept its secrets. And sometimes, the keeper never truly leaves. By the third night, the fog had thickened, curling around the lighthouse like ghostly fingers. The footsteps upstairs had become relentless, circling, pacing, sometimes pausing just above my room. I would strain my ears, trying to catch a pattern, trying to convince myself it was rats, or the wind, or my imagination. Then came the whispering, soft at first, almost drowned out by the waves. Don't look down, don't leave. I stayed huddled in the lantern room, heart hammering. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of the figure at the cliff edge, hunched and swaying against the fog. Its uniform was ancient, stitched with rust-colored thread, the buttons glinting dimly in the lighthouse beam. I realized the figure was not stationary. It moved when I wasn't looking, always just at the edge of visibility, waiting, observing. And then the logbook fell from the shelf on its own. The page flipped to a fresh entry, written in handwriting I did not recognize. The sea remembers. So do we. The fourth night, I could no longer pretend the lighthouse was safe. I stayed awake, scanning every window, watching the fog shift and the waves crash, listening to the low, steady creaking of the tower. The figure was closer than ever, now on the rocks directly beneath the lighthouse, head cocked unnaturally, arms dangling like broken branches. I tried shouting, waving my arms, even throwing small stones toward it. Nothing. It didn't react. It simply stared, motionless, as if the fog itself had formed it into being. I descended the spiral staircase cautiously, trying to make sense of what was happening. Every step creaked too loudly, echoing against the stone walls. Then I noticed the water. The tide had surged unnaturally high, reaching the cliff's edge, almost licking the foundation of the lighthouse. And in the dark foam of the surf, I glimpsed dozens of shapes. More figures, hunched and still, watching, waiting. I realized then, Black Wave Point didn't only guard the lighthouse. It claimed those who ignored its warning. I spent the fifth night in the lantern room, unable to sleep, watching the fog twist and churn. The footsteps above had stopped, replaced by a low thrum that seemed to vibrate through the stone. The ocean roared louder than ever, as if warning me, reminding me, pressing its power against the cliffs. Then I heard it, a single deliberate knock on the metal railing outside the lantern. I froze. There was no one I could see. Yet I knew it had come from the cliff's edge. My pulse spiked, my fingers trembling. I opened the window slightly, just enough to hear the sound better. Another knock followed, echoing across the rocks, then another, rhythmically, like a heartbeat synchronized to the surf. The logbook slid open on the floor beside me, pages fluttering violently before settling on a fresh entry. The tide knows your fear. So do we. That's when I realized the keeper wasn't just watching. It was testing me, gauging whether I could survive the night. The wind picked up suddenly, whistling through cracks in the lighthouse walls. I gripped the railing, heart racing, trying to steady my thoughts. The fog outside thickened to a near-white wall, swallowing the cliff and the ocean beyond. Then I saw it move, closer than ever. The spectral figure of the previous keeper climbed the rocks with unnatural speed, limbs bending in impossible angles, head cocked, eyes hollow. Its uniform was soaked, hanging limply from its emaciated frame, yet its presence radiated cold and command. I knew I had to act. Retreating into the tower seemed futile. The sea itself pressed against the cliff, as if urging me to jump or be dragged in. I grabbed the logbook, the only thing connecting me to the lighthouse's secrets. Its pages guided me to a hidden trapdoor in the lantern room, a narrow spiral descending below the foundation. I didn't hesitate. I climbed down, leaving the spectral keeper and the roaring sea behind. At least for now. The hidden spiral staircase led me down into a cramped stone chamber beneath the lighthouse. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling in shallow puddles on the cold floor. The air smelled of salt, rust, and something far fouler: decay and old fear. I fumbled along the walls, following the faint glow of phosphorescent moss that clung to the stones. Then I saw it. A carved alcove filled with nautical instruments and logbooks, some centuries old, some freshly written. Each detailed the lives of keepers who had vanished, their fates sealed by the cliff, the sea, and the spectral figure above. I flipped through one log, hands trembling. A keeper had tried to flee the lighthouse in the dead of night, only to be found days later, washed ashore, eyes wide in eternal horror. A whisper echoed behind me, cold and hollow. Curiosity binds you, but it does not save you. The chamber seemed to pulse with a life of its own, urging me forward, deeper into secrets I was not meant to uncover. The hidden spiral staircase led me down into a cramped stone chamber beneath the lighthouse. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling in shallow puddles on the cold floor. The air smelled of salt, rust, and something far fouler: decay and old fear. I fumbled along the walls, following the faint glow of phosphorescent moss that clung to the stones. Then I saw it. A carved alcove, filled with nautical instruments and logbooks, some centuries old, some freshly written. Each detailed the lives of keepers who had vanished, their fates sealed by the cliff, the sea, and the spectral figure above. I flipped through one log, hands trembling. A keeper had tried to flee the lighthouse in the dead of night, only to be found days later, washed ashore, eyes wide in eternal horror. A whisper echoed behind me, cold and hollow. Curiosity binds you, but it does not save you. The chamber seemed to pulse with a life of its own, urging me forward, deeper into secrets I was not meant to uncover. The ninth night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The whispers, the footsteps, the hollow eyes in the pool, they were closing in, testing my resolve. Every shadow in the subterranean chamber seemed to pulse with intent, pressing me toward the far wall, where a narrow tunnel led upward, back toward the cliffs. I climbed, wet stone cutting into my palms, water dripping from the ceiling, until I emerged into a small alcove above the cliff, overlooking the stormy ocean. The spectral keeper stood below, impossibly still, arms outstretched toward me, head tilted as if in judgment. The wind carried its voice, deep and hollow, reaching into my chest. "You've seen too much. Now, you stay or join us." I froze, heart hammering, realizing the choice was not mine. Then the tide surged violently, waves crashing higher, clawing at the rocks. The cliff seemed alive, threatening to swallow me. With no other option, I leapt across a narrow gap to a rocky outcrop, narrowly avoiding the wrath of both sea and spectral guardian. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me down the cliffs toward the town below, the wind tearing at my coat and the roar of the ocean in my ears. Behind me, I could feel the lighthouse shuddering, the keeper's presence pressing against every step. Yet it did not chase me. It waited, patient and eternal. When I reached the first street of the town, the fog had cleared. The lighthouse on the point stood quiet, normal, as if it had never been haunted. But I knew better. I could still hear the faint chanting beneath the roar of the waves echoing in my chest. I never returned to Black Wave Point. I never told anyone outside the town. Some places in British Columbia are beautiful, until they aren't. Until they remember you, until they test you, until they decide your fate. And the lighthouse will always watch, waiting for the next keeper. My name is Lila Thompson, and this happened the summer I joined a small hiking expedition in Ravenwood Forest, deep in British Columbia. I had been drawn to the forest for its untouched wilderness, the promise of adventure, and the chance to escape my noisy city life. From the start, there was something unsettling about Ravenwood. The trees were impossibly tall, their canopies so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. Trails twisted in ways that didn't make sense, and the air was thick with an almost tangible silence, broken only by distant crows and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. On the first night, as our small group camped near a clearing, I noticed a faint path leading deeper into the forest, one that wasn't on our map. Something about it called to me, a mix of curiosity and unease that I couldn't shake. When I mentioned it to the others, they laughed it off. But I couldn't. The path seemed alive, shifting, waiting for someone to follow it. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant cawing of crows. I could feel something watching, though I saw nothing. The next morning, I decided to take a quick look at the mysterious path before we continued on the main trail. As I stepped onto it, the air grew cooler, damp, almost suffocating. The forest closed around me, trees seeming to bend inward, blocking the sun, and the trail behind me faded into shadows. I tried calling out to the group, but my voice seemed to vanish, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Birds fled silently, their wings cutting through the mist with no sound. I realized then that the path wasn't just hidden, it was selective. It revealed itself to me, and perhaps to no one else. And something in Ravenwood Forest didn't want anyone leaving once they had stepped onto it. By the third day, the forest seemed alive with intent. The main trail disappeared entirely, leaving only the hidden path I had glimpsed earlier. The trees leaned closer, their bark scratched with marks that looked almost like symbols, but I couldn't decipher them. Every step I took, the forest seemed to shift behind me, rearranging itself. I tried to call out to my group, but my voice was swallowed by the towering pines. No answer came. The wind carried whispers, soft and teasing, as if the forest itself spoke my name. Suddenly, a shadow darted between the trees. Not an animal. Too large, too deliberate. It moved with a silent grace, always staying just out of reach. My heartbeat raced, every instinct screaming to run. But the path ahead twisted in ways I couldn't predict. And then I realized something horrifying. I hadn't seen the sun all morning. It felt like hours, yet no light changed. Ravenwood didn't measure time as the outside world did. It measured fear. By nightfall, panic set in. I stumbled across a clearing I didn't recognize, the mist curling thick around the roots and rocks. The forest seemed infinite in every direction, yet I felt trapped in a pocket of unnatural silence. No animals called, no wind stirred. Only the path, faintly glowing under the moonlight, invited me forward. I followed it, terrified. Noticing footprints that weren't mine, deep impressions of long, clawed feet, stopping abruptly, as if the creature observing me had vanished. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. A wild animal? A prankster? No. Nothing about this forest obeyed logic. Then came the whispers again, louder, harsher, echoing between the trees. You belong here. Forever. My skin crawled, and a chill ran down my spine. I understood, in a gut-wrenching moment, that Ravenwood wasn't just a forest. It was a predator. And I was the prey. By the 5th day, exhaustion had set in. But the forest seemed to feed off it, growing more oppressive with every step. The mist thickened, curling around my legs, and the tree's twisted branches reached like claws, brushing against my arms as I passed. Every now and then, I glimpsed figures moving in the shadows, tall, thin, with glowing eyes. But whenever I looked directly, they vanished. The whispers became voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, yet their meaning was clear. Do not leave. Do not escape. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail I had followed for hours had dissolved, replaced by unfamiliar rocks, roots, and hollows. Then I saw the first signs of others. Tattered clothing snagged on branches, abandoned supplies, and scrawled warnings in the dirt. Turn back or join us. My blood ran cold. Ravenwood didn't just trap hikers, it had claimed them. And I realized, with a sinking dread, that I might be next. I pressed onward, heart pounding, trying to find any landmark I recognized. The forest seemed endless, folding in on itself, each step bringing me deeper into unfamiliar territory. The whispers followed, echoing from every direction, merging with the distant sound of running water that I hadn't noticed before. A sudden movement caught my eye. One of the thin, shadowed figures stepped onto the path. Its body was elongated, limbs bending unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly red in the fog. It didn't approach, only watched, tilting its head as if assessing me. I panicked, sprinting blindly through the mist, until I tripped over a root and fell into a small hollow. I curled into a ball, barely daring to breathe, listening to the whispering voices circling me like predators. And then I noticed it. The hollow wasn't empty. Tiny footprints surrounded me, leading in and out as though others had been hiding here, waiting, watching. Ravenwood had a history, and I had stumbled right into its heart. By the 7th day, my energy was nearly gone. But something drove me forward. A mixture of fear, desperation, and the will to survive. The mist had become almost impenetrable, thick as wool, and the shadows of the trees stretched and twisted unnaturally. I could hear movement all around me. Footsteps, branches snapping, whispers that carried both curiosity and malice. Then I saw them. Dozens of figures, thin and pale with glowing eyes, emerging silently from the fog. They didn't run, they didn't chase. They simply surrounded the path ahead, blocking any chance of escape. My heart raced, and I realized there was no turning back. The voices became clear, chanting in unison, a low, hypnotic rhythm that pulsed through my skull. You are ours. You belong to the forest. I understood then that Ravenwood's guardians weren't there to attack. They were there to claim, to make me part of the forest itself. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I had to find another way. I stumbled deeper into the forest, trying to find a way around the supernatural blockade. The path seemed to twist and fold back on itself, creating loops I couldn't escape. Every step brought whispers closer, voices overlapping, as if the forest itself was speaking directly into my mind. Suddenly, I spotted a faint glimmer of light far ahead. An old ranger's cabin, half collapsed and overgrown with moss. Hope surged through me. I ran, branches tearing at my clothes, roots tripping me, yet I didn't dare stop. As I neared the cabin, the figures fell back slightly, allowing me passage, but their eyes never left me. The chanting continued, growing louder in my mind, as if warning me that leaving Ravenwood wouldn't be simple. I reached the cabin and collapsed inside, gasping, barely able to move. The walls were lined with old maps, some marked with warnings I hadn't noticed before. I realized then, the forest had allowed me a glimpse of safety, but the Guardians would follow. If I stayed too long, I would become one of them. The 9th day, I knew I had to move before the forest fully claimed me. Every shadow, every whisper pressed closer, following my every step. I clutched a map from the cabin, though much of it was torn and illegible. The trail outside the clearing seemed faintly real. Yet it shifted beneath my feet, as though the forest itself was alive. Then I saw them, closer than ever. The thin, pale figures, dozens of them emerging silently from the mist, their glowing eyes locked on me. I could feel their intent pressing into my mind, a cold, invasive force urging me to stop, to submit. I ran blindly, branches cutting my arms, roots tripping me, until I stumbled upon a small creek. A real one this time. The water glimmered under the faint sunlight breaking through the trees. As I crossed it, the figures hesitated, their forms dissolving slightly in the light. Ravenwood had allowed me a narrow window of escape, but I knew it would remember me forever. I emerged from Ravenwood Forest near a ranger station, trembling, soaked, and exhausted. The town beyond the forest looked peaceful, ordinary, but I could still feel Ravenwood's presence lingering in my mind. Every whisper, every shadow, replayed behind my eyes. I reported nothing to the authorities. How could I explain the forest that shifted, the guardians that watched, or the path that claimed time itself? I didn't try to return. Even years later, I avoid maps of the area, avoid stories of hikers lost in Ravenwood, and I never, ever speak of the trail to anyone outside the town. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I can still hear the whispers, faint and teasing, carried on the wind from deep within the trees. The forest remembers those who wander too far, and it waits patiently for the next victim to stumble onto its vanishing trail. Ravenwood Forest is alive, and it never forgets. My name is Derek Marshall, and this happened during a road trip along the coastal highways of British Columbia. I had been driving for hours, chasing the fading light as dusk fell, when I spotted a small, weathered motel tucked behind a stand of fir trees overlooking Crescent Bay. Its neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing with a tired, eerie rhythm. Exhausted, I decided to stop for the night. The parking lot was nearly empty, the asphalt cracked and littered with fallen leaves. The receptionist, an older woman with a tight smile, handed me a key without asking for much more than my name. Her eyes lingered just a moment too long, as if she already knew something about me. The room itself was small, dimly lit with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. Yet it felt off. The air smelled faintly of salt, mildew, and something I couldn't name, something faintly metallic. By midnight, the silence around the motel became almost unbearable, as if the walls themselves were listening. The second night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows stretched across the room, shifting slightly, even though the blinds were drawn. Every creak of the floorboards sounded amplified, as if someone, or something, was pacing outside my door. I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings make noise, the wind, my imagination. But then came the silence. Not normal silence, but heavy, oppressive, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. It filled the room so completely that I could hear my own heartbeat in a way that made me dizzy. I stepped out into the hallway. The lights flickered, revealing long stretches of empty corridor. Yet I could feel eyes on me from every corner. The receptionist's earlier stare came back to me in memory, an unspoken warning I had ignored. Something about Crescent Bay Motel didn't want visitors to leave. I didn't know it yet, but my first night would be only the beginning. By the third night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed magnified. The faint buzz of the neon sign outside, the distant crash of waves against the cliffs, and the subtle creak of doors that should have been locked. I decided to explore the motel, thinking I might uncover the source of the oppressive feeling. The hallway stretched endlessly, even though I had walked it before. Room numbers shifted subtly, as if the building itself was rearranging itself. I peeked into the rooms, all empty, yet the beds looked slept in, the blankets disturbed. In one room, I saw a figure sitting in the corner, back to me, perfectly still. When I blinked, it was gone. On the reception desk, I found a guest book with names dated decades back. But many entries were recent, names I didn't recognize, scribbled in frantic handwriting, some accompanied by ominous notes. Do not stay longer than 3 nights. The motel wasn't just old, it was alive, and it had rules. By midnight, I heard it. A faint tapping on the walls, like fingernails drumming in rhythm. It moved with intent, circling my room, traveling up and down the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door, but it sounded deeper, as though it came from inside the walls themselves. The air grew colder, my breath fogging as if winter had moved into the room. Shadows stretched across the ceiling, undulating and writhing as if alive. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was the building settling. But then a whisper brushed my ear, soft and deliberate. "Why are you still here?" I grabbed my jacket and ran to the lobby, only to find the receptionist gone. The neon sign outside flickered violently, throwing red and blue light into the empty parking lot. Every window reflected multiple shadows, all moving independently, all watching. Crescent Bay Motel wasn't just haunted, it was a trap. And I was beginning to understand that leaving might not be as simple as opening the door. By the 5th night, I realized the motel had rules I could neither see nor understand. The whispering had grown louder, more insistent, carrying with it a sense of hunger. It wasn't just the building, it was the air itself, pressing against me, guiding me toward certain rooms. I opened a door at the far end of the hallway and found an abandoned lounge. The furniture was old and threadbare, but in the dim light, I noticed something else. Dozens of footprints, some human, some elongated and strange, moving across the floor as if the room had been walked through moments ago. The walls were covered in scribbled messages. 3 nights only. Leave before the 4th, or stay forever. Then I saw them. Figures, barely visible, standing in the corners. Pale, silent, and unmoving. But their eyes followed me. I froze, realizing the motel didn't just want me to leave. It wanted to watch, to judge, to decide my fate. Desperate, I tried leaving that night. But the exit refused me. Doors that had once opened now led into walls, Hallways twisted unnaturally, rooms rearranging themselves, as if the motel was alive and deliberately trapping me. Every step echoed in ways that weren't possible, amplifying my fear. From the shadows, I felt their eyes on me, the spectral inhabitants of Crescent Bay. Their forms shimmered faintly, elongated and unnatural, but human enough to terrify. They whispered, circling me silently, their voices harmonizing into a single chilling command. "You belong to us now." I ducked into a room and barricaded the door, but the air thickened, pressing against my chest. I realized then that staying still didn't guarantee safety. The motel's power extended beyond sight. It could manipulate space, time, and perception. I understood in that moment that my survival depended on understanding the motel's rules and moving faster than the shadows could follow. By the 7th night, I realized the motel's game was deliberate. The hallways stretched impossibly, the staircases twisted back on themselves, and every corner hid unseen eyes. The spectral figures followed, but never approached, merely observing, testing my resolve. I found myself drawn to the basement door, a place I hadn't dared enter before. The air grew colder with every step down the creaking stairs. The walls were damp, covered in years of mold and faded scribbles warning, "Do not linger." My flashlight flickered, revealing shapes pressed against the walls, shifting just beyond recognition. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting, almost hypnotic. My pulse quickened. I could see faint outlines of previous guests, frozen mid-action, their eyes wide with terror, trapped in an endless loop of the motel's design. The realization hit me. Crescent Bay didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds, folding its victims into the building itself. The only way out was to understand its pattern, or I would vanish like the others. I explored the basement further, each step echoing unnaturally. Old furniture and debris cluttered the space, yet there were traces of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, fresh scuff marks, and a faint warmth in the air. The chanting grew louder, surrounding me, pressing into my skull like an invisible vice. In one corner, I found an old trunk. Inside were belongings of past guests, journals, photographs, and personal effects. Some worn to near nothing, others freshly written, their pages trembling as if alive. One journal contained the last entries of a man who had stayed 3 nights, the final words scrawled in terror. "The motel knows. It waits. It always waits." I understood then that the building was sentient, feeding off fear and curiosity alike. Every visitor became part of its story, another layer in its walls. The motel had rules, yes, but it had patience far beyond human comprehension. I had to escape before the 4th night ended, or I would become permanent. By the 9th night, I knew I had only hours to escape. The motel seemed to pulse around me, hallways stretching impossibly, doors appearing where none had existed before. The spectral figures followed, their glowing eyes boring into me, yet they never touched me. They were patient hunters, testing my courage, my resolve, my sanity. I ran to the lobby, hoping to find a way out. The receptionist was gone, and the neon sign outside flickered violently, casting long, jagged shadows through the windows. Then I saw it. The front door, slightly ajar, as if the building itself offered one final chance. I bolted toward it, my hands trembling, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The chanting rose to a deafening crescendo, echoing inside my mind. One last glance behind me revealed the figures frozen, watching, waiting for the next guest. I threw myself out the door, lungs burning, and ran into the cold night air, never looking back. Crescent Bay would always remember me, always. I never returned to Crescent Bay Motel. From the safety of a nearby town, I watched it through the misted windows of my rental car, the neon sign flickering weakly like a dying heartbeat. The building seemed ordinary again, yet I knew better. Its walls contained echoes of the trapped, shadows of those who had vanished, and a patience that outlasted time itself. Even now, years later, I can hear the faint hum of the motel in the back of my mind, whispering warnings, reminders of the nights I survived. I tell no one of the true horrors within those walls, how the building bends reality, traps souls, and tests the limits of fear. Crescent Bay Motel is not just haunted. It is a predator, and those who enter may not leave, for some doors close forever. I survived, but only because I understood its rules. Others will not. My name is Evan Harper, and this happened during my summer job as an assistant at the old Crescent Point Lighthouse on the rugged coast of British Columbia. I had always been drawn to isolated places, to the roaring sea and the wind that could cut through bone. But nothing prepared me for the darkness that resided in that lighthouse. The lighthouse stood on a cliff, battered by storms and surrounded by jagged rocks. It had been abandoned for decades before I arrived, and the previous keeper left in a hurry, leaving only cryptic notes about strange occurrences and voices in the fog. On my first night, as the fog rolled in thick from the sea, the beam of the lighthouse cut through it, illuminating nothing but mist. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crash of waves far below. Yet beneath that, I could hear faint sounds. A whisper of steps on the spiral staircase, a scratching from the walls, like something unseen was pacing, waiting. By the second night, the fog had grown denser, and the lighthouse felt like a prison. Every time I climbed the spiral staircase to check the lamp, I could hear soft tapping behind me, as though invisible hands traced the railing. I would spin around, but nothing was there. I tried to rationalize it. Creaking metal, old wood settling, my imagination running wild. But then I heard it, whispers, not carried by the wind, but inside my mind. A voice, low and guttural, calling my name repeatedly. It promised secrets, danger, and something I couldn't quite comprehend. The previous keeper's notes returned to me in memory. The fog knows. The lighthouse watches. Do not stay alone at night. I laughed nervously at first, but the humor died quickly as a shadow crossed the landing above me, large and malformed, moving against the logic of light and physics. I realized then that the lighthouse had more than history. It had intent, and it had been waiting for me. By the third night, the fog outside had become almost solid, swallowing the cliff, the waves, even the stars. The lighthouse felt like it existed in a separate world, a liminal space between reality and nightmare. I could no longer tell if the sounds were echoes from the structure settling or something alive moving within the walls. As I climbed the spiral staircase, I noticed faint scratches on the steps, not from tools or animals, but from something large, something unnatural. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, and each breath felt thick with anticipation. From the corner of my eye, I glimpsed a tall shadow pacing the lamp room, its form blurred, almost stretching into the mist outside the windows. I recalled the old keeper's last warning. The lighthouse chooses its own. Once it notices, it will follow you wherever you go. I shivered. I didn't just feel watched, I felt hunted. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the beam of light beckoned, revealing nothing yet, exposing everything in a cruel game of perception. By the fourth night, sleep had abandoned me entirely. I tried to distract myself by logging notes, charting weather, But the whispers grew louder, insistent, and impossible to ignore. They spoke in fragmented sentences, garbled yet intelligible. The sea remembers. The cliffs demand. You belong. The wind howled against the lighthouse walls, rattling the windows and doors. Yet the sounds inside were separate, closer, deliberate. I saw movement in the beam of the lamp. Flickers of figures far out on the jagged cliffs, walking impossibly, their feet barely touching rock. Their forms twisted unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible angles, faces obscured by the fog. I tried calling out, but my voice was swallowed instantly, leaving only the roar of the ocean and the rhythmic hum of the light. Panic surged through me as I realized the lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it tested anyone foolish enough to linger. Every night, the fog deepened, and the shadows grew bolder. I understood then that the line between sea, land, and nightmare had already blurred. By the fifth night, exhaustion and fear had merged into a sharp, unrelenting edge. Every sound, the creak of the spiral staircase, the hum of the lamp, the distant crash of waves, felt amplified, each carrying a hidden meaning. I could feel a presence behind me, unseen but tangible, brushing against my skin, whispering unintelligible words that sent shivers down my spine. I finally reached the lamp room and stared into the swirling fog beyond the cliff. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the mist, taller than any human, moving against the wind as if it were weightless. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lighthouse beam. It paused, tilting its head, and I realized it wasn't merely observing, it was judging. I stumbled backward, tripping over a coil of rope, my heart pounding. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single commanding voice. The light calls. The cliffs remember. You are chosen. For the first time, I understood the danger. The lighthouse had selected me. Panic surged as I scrambled down the spiral staircase, trying to escape the lamp room's oppressive energy. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the beam of light, and the cliffs below seemed to stretch out endlessly. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, and faint scratching noises followed me, circling, climbing the walls like claws. I ducked into the storage room, slamming the door behind me, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The whispers had grown insistent, almost intelligible. You can't leave. You belong to the lighthouse. The sound of the waves below became distorted, as if the sea itself were screaming. A sudden movement in the shadows caught my eye, a translucent figure, pale and elongated, gliding across the room. It paused, head cocked, as if studying me, testing my fear. I realized the lighthouse wasn't merely haunted, it was a predator. And tonight, it would decide whether I survived. I knew one thing with certainty. I had to confront it before the fog claimed me entirely. By the seventh night, I knew hiding was useless. The presence within the lighthouse had grown bolder, moving with purpose, following my every step. I felt its gaze on my back, unrelenting and patient, and the whispers had become words I could understand. The cliffs demand. The light chooses. You cannot escape. I climbed the spiral staircase to the lamp room one last time, determined to confront whatever haunted Crescent Point. The fog outside swirled violently, hiding the jagged cliffs beneath a white void. In the center of the room, a figure formed, tall, blackened by shadow, its eyes like molten silver reflecting the beam of the lighthouse. It did not speak, but I could feel its intent pressing into my mind. A hunger for fear, a test of will. I raised my hands, not knowing what to say. But the lighthouse seemed to hum with energy, vibrating through the floorboards and into my chest. I realized then that this wasn't a ghost or human. It was the lighthouse itself, a sentient force guarding its domain. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The shadow remained still, yet its presence filled every corner of the room, every shadow, every beam of light. It wasn't merely watching. It was testing me, waiting to see if I would break. The fog outside seemed to respond to the entity, swirling faster, forming shapes that mimicked the cliffs, the sea, and even me. I felt a pull, as if the lighthouse wanted me to merge with its essence, to become part of its eternal watch over Crescent Point. Panic surged, but something inside me clicked. I had to fight, not physically, but mentally. I focused on the distant horizon beyond the fog, imagining the sun rising, imagining myself beyond the cliffs. The shadow flinched subtly, as if sensing my resolve, testing the limits of its power. I realized then that the lighthouse thrived on fear, but courage could disrupt its hold, if only for a brief moment. By the 9th night, the confrontation had reached its peak. The fog outside had become a swirling, living entity, pressing against the lighthouse walls as if trying to consume everything within. The shadow loomed closer, stretching unnaturally, its molten eyes reflecting my every fear. I could feel my mind being probed, memories and anxieties laid bare before this ancient force. I clenched my fists and forced myself to focus on what I knew, on the sea, the cliffs, and the distant horizon beyond the fog. Slowly, the shadow paused, its head tilting, its form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. I realized that the lighthouse didn't simply punish, it judged. It measured courage against fear, patience against panic. With a deep breath, I spoke aloud, asserting my presence, my will to survive. The shadow hesitated, then slowly receded toward the beam of the lamp, dissolving into the fogs outside. The lighthouse hummed quietly, as if acknowledging my endurance. By the 10th night, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the jagged cliffs and roaring sea below. I stepped onto the balcony of the lamp room, the wind tearing at my clothes. But the oppressive presence had faded. The lighthouse remained silent, its beam cutting across the empty horizon, as if it had accepted my survival. I left Crescent Point the next morning, carrying only memories of the shadow, the whispers, and the weight of a lighthouse that was more than stone and metal. It was an entity that tested the limits of human courage. The old keeper's warnings now made sense. The lighthouse chooses its own, and those who remain must face its judgment. Even years later, I can feel it in quiet moments. The pulse of the wind, the hum of distant waves. A reminder that the lighthouse waits for the next visitor foolish enough to enter. I survived, but I will never forget the sentinel of Crescent Point.